Hello, it's me again, Pete Smith. I thought I'd tell you a bit about where the Fusion amp originally came from. My life in the 60s was pretty ordinary. I was fresh out of the RAF, radar engineer. Most evenings and weekends I was building guitar amps using the name Pan Sound, and in the daytime working at Redifon Telecoms in Wandsworth, London, on military radio systems. I lived in a tiny bedsit in Wandsworth, one of the more boring suburbs of London. As I say, not very exciting. I was running a small band called Quantum, and we played rock and roll and pop at various venues around Wandsworth and Clapham. We enjoyed what we were doing, but there was no spark of obsession or dedication there. I was pretty much a loner, even though I knocked around with Brian and John, the other band members. Brian played rhythm and John was the drummer. I played lead guitar, rather badly, and sang. Our kind of band was 10 a penny in London in those days, and if we had an edge, it was our good vocal harmonies. We used to borrow a bass player for the more serious gigs. I used to frequent the Bag of Nails club down the West End about once or twice a week. That was back in 1966 and I was 25, taking life as it came with no long range plans. One of the contractors at Redifon, Paul, a production planner, would sometimes show up at the Bag, and our paths occasionally crossed at work. On one occasion I was in the works canteen when he showed up. He asked me if I was going down to the Bag on Friday. I said, why, what's on? I wasn't really interested in who was playing, as I was usually to be found holding up the bar on a Friday night at the Bag, regardless. But this turned out to be a daytime event, very unusual. It's this bloke from America. He's got his own band. He's called Jim something. It's just that I heard the Bag is going to be jam full all day Friday. So if you're going to get there, you better go there early, Paul said. Well, that was no problem. You always had to get there early to get anywhere near the bar. It turned out that Paul was not going. He didn't fancy taking a day off his holidays just to be crushed at the Bag of Nails. Well, it takes all sorts. I mean, I liked it, you know. Around 11 on Friday, I managed to blag my way into the Bag by saying I was with Jimmy Page. It worked, but he never actually turned up. I was surprised to see a number of faces, most of whom I'd seen at the Bag from time to time, but they were here in strength today. I immediately had the unworthy thought that they were all here to see this yank make a prick of himself. As it turned out, I couldn't have been more wrong. The Bag of Nails was certainly packed. There was Jeff Beck, Pete Townsend, Eric Clapton. It was like a who's who of guitar greats. I felt great to be there. I felt excited as I realised I might be in for something special today. When Jimi Hendrix eventually came on, there was no great fuss, but as soon as he started to play, I realised that this was not your usual blues. And to be honest, the place was a bit small for that kind of volume. But it didn't seem to matter, as Jimi Hendrix handles his guitar like some sort of guitar contortionist. One minute he was twanging the strings with his teeth, and the next he was doing stuff behind his head. And he never missed a beat during all that, you know. The engineer in me shuddered when he used his teeth. What if the mains earth had been wired wrong? I was certainly impressed. This was streets away from the usual well-behaved bands that we got at the Bag. At some point during the afternoon, I felt a sharp push on my back and turned to see the grinning face of Jimi Hendrix. He was trying to get to the bar, I guessed. On stage, he looked to be taller than average, but here he was, about an inch below my 5'10". He stared at me for a moment, and then he said, "What the f am I doing here?" Before I could ask if he meant at the bar or in the club, he says, "Who are you anyway?" I thought, this guy's pissed or high. So I said, "I'm Pete Smith. I make guitar amps." I thought that summed me up well enough. I felt that my guitar amps certainly defined me better than my day job did. "Well, you can make one for me," he said. "I'm sick of this shit they expect me to use." And with that he lurched off, and I never saw him again. Talk about a brief encounter. But that wasn't going to be the end of the story. About a fortnight later I was propping the bar up as usual in the early hours of Saturday morning when a stranger spoke to me. "Are you that bloke that makes guitar amps?" I admitted it. "OK then, I need you to make one for a client of mine." "And who are you?" I managed, a bit shocked to say the least. I was selling a steady trickle of bespoke guitar amps, some to reasonably famous people, but no one had ever approached me at the Bag o' Nails about building guitar amps. "I'm Chas Chandler," he said. "I'm Jimi Hendrix's manager. He said you'd be making him a guitar amp. Here's a list of what it's got to have." He handed me a crumpled London Steakhouse paper napkin with a scribbled list on it. It read, "Practice and recording amp. Small and easy to carry, like one of the little Fenders. Quiet enough to use in a hotel room, but plenty of volume for a small gig. It must have good tone and no hum. It needs to give good distortion at low volume, and it needs to be quiet when I am, so it's good for recording. And it must have the British sound." I was a bit taken aback, to put it mildly. Several of these must-haves were in direct conflict. I ummed and ahed for a bit, and Chas finally said, "Well, can you do it or not?" I really didn't know, but I said yes anyway, as I've always been up for a challenge, and I was already working out how I could deal with some of the requirements. I stuffed the paper napkin into my trousers pocket. I hadn't had much of a talk with Jimi Hendrix, I thought. He had delivered a single sentence before vanishing into the crowd. I wondered if that's how the Americans set up their business deals. Chas Chandler said, "200 sheets, do you?" Ah, that was more like it. In those days I only charged 50 quid for an amp. "Yeah, just about," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "It'll take 3 weeks. Where do I deliver it to?" "We're all living at Ringo's," he said. "Best if I collect it." He handed me a scrap of paper with a phone number written on it. "That's my number. Call me when it's done." I thought that would be it for now, but he produced a wallet and took out a bunch of cash, which he passed to me. He said, "Don't think I generally hand out cash to strangers, but Jimmy wanted to get this out of the way in case he's broke when the amp's ready. Call me when it's done." And that was it. An order for a guitar amp after a single sentence of discussion with the guy who was going to be using it. Now that must be some kind of record. But now I had to build it. 1 week for design, 1 week to build it, and 1 week to make it try and do what Jimi Hendrix wanted. A tall end order, but then, as I said, I was always up for a challenge in those days, and I still am, I suppose. It proved almost impossible to make that amp 54 years ago, but I managed it. I thought at the time that it was my best design ever, but too large and heavy to ever build again, until now. Now modern electronics have made it possible for me to reproduce the amp exactly as I designed it in 1966, but to support it with state-of-the-art power supplies. Now, instead of being heavy and bulky, the amplifier, which I'm calling Fusion, is small and light. It's less than 2.5 kilograms, but it still has the great unique sound that amazes any guitarist who tries it. And that's how this amplifier was originally dreamed up. I'll see you later.